Hi, Smarter News. Happy first full week of spring. We have a bunch of SmartHER Starters for you, a sampling of some really big news stories, all with threads overseas from Central America, Afghanistan, and Asia. One thing that connects all these stories: timing. We're just a few weeks into a new administration with new policies, new perspective, new posture on the world stage. That said, the roots of a lot of these stories date back years, if not decades. And honoring those two factors are going to be really important in our reporting. One of the things I love about SmartHER News is that so many different people with different political backgrounds all find a home here. And ironically, you share something in common in that you voice the same frustrations with me sometimes, that I'm not more editorial in our content. We are fiercely dedicated to being nonpartisan. We want to give you just the basics of what you need to know and then get out of your way so you can come to your own conclusions. It's our way of showing respect for you and for your time. We know it's a little bit different. We hope it's smarter. So we'll start close to home at the U.S. southern border and a debate about what's happening there. Some call it a crisis, others call it a challenge. What should you know about this? Bottom line, the number of people apprehended at the U.S. southern border for illegally coming into the country has gone up. So here's a little perspective just going back to October. Since October, the number of family units, so those are adults traveling with minor children, has quadrupled to more than 19,000 in February. If you go back to October and look at the number of unaccompanied minors apprehended at the U.S. southern border, that number has just about doubled to just around 9,500 in February. So the increase is notable. Why the increase? Any number of reasons. You can look at economic instability, political instability in Central America, crime and violence. But ABC News did something really important this weekend. They actually talked to people coming to the U.S. southern border, and they mentioned one of their reasons for coming is the Biden administration. So what's changed? Here's just a big overview in broad strokes. Under the Trump administration, if you came into the country illegally, even if you were applying for asylum, even if you were a minor, you could be apprehended, arrested, and prioritized for deportation. These policies were controversial, they were legally challenged at times, and they evolved throughout the administration. The Biden administration has a different posture. And here's what the Department of Homeland Security Secretary said just today.
The border is closed. We are expelling families, we are expelling single adults, and we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children.
What the U.S. government defines as children is anyone 17 years old and younger. Now, last month, the numbers show that the majority of people that were apprehended at the U.S. southern border were actually expelled. But there's still thousands of people, including thousands of children, still within government custody, and a question about how to properly care for them all. So we're going to be watching the administration's next steps. We're also going to be watching Congress. Late last week, the House of Representatives, the majority of Democrats, passed a bill with a little bit of Republican help that included a pathway to citizenship for those who came into the country illegally as children. We're going to watch to see what happens next to this legislation in the Senate, and also just watch Congress in general. Remember, Democrats have the majority in the House and the Senate. If they really want to tackle this issue of immigration, they have the numbers to do so. Now, let's turn to Afghanistan, the site of America's longest war. We had a surprise visit from the Secretary of Defense to the country this weekend, his first trip there. We have about 2,500 U.S. troops still stationed in Afghanistan. That's down from the height of the war when more than 100,000 were in the country in 2011. And what we're watching is a May 1st deadline, because that's a deadline set by the Trump administration for the majority withdrawal of American troops. And so what are we watching now? We're watching talks between the United States, the Afghan government, and the Taliban. These negotiations took place during the Trump administration and during the Obama administration as well. And what the talks are aimed at is some sort of political agreement to end the war. Why is that? There's a concern that without an agreement, the country could dissolve into chaos, into civil war. And that environment is very conducive for terrorist organizations to take advantage of. In fact, that was the environment that Al-Qaeda used to plan the 9/11 attacks. Even though multiple administrations, including Democrats and Republicans, have engaged in these peace talks, there's been criticism about whether or not the United States should even do that, or whether or not it will even matter. We're going to be watching this. It's a developing story and a big question about whether or not America's longest war actually ends in 2021. Finally, let's talk a little bit about China. There was a big meeting, the first of its kind, between China and the United States under the new administration late last week. And the Secretary of State was coming off of trips to Japan and South Korea, some really key allies of the United States. During this meeting, the U.S. voiced concerns to China about things like cyber attacks and China's overall challenge to global peace and order. And China came back with complaints of their own against the United States, including human rights abuses, pointing to Black Lives Matter as proof that the United States should do better. Needless to say, this meeting was described as tense. One story I'm watching is reports out of Asia today by the Philippines that there are 200 vessels in the South China Sea tied to China. Despite the name South China Sea, that area of waterway doesn't belong to China, although they claim it as their territory. The United States and others want to make sure that this is international waterway that stays free and open. So I'm going to be watching to see if these reports are verified and if this story gets bigger throughout the week. It's interesting to get this report right after a major meeting between the United States and China. So we'll watch for that, but it gives you an idea of the alert in the region. Meantime, back here at home, 3 stories that we're watching include a rise in COVID-19 infections in states like Mississippi, Michigan, and New Jersey, despite the fact that we're also seeing more COVID-19 vaccinations. We're watching a report that Iran had plans to target an army base near Washington, D.C., and of course, watching any news on the investigation into the shooting in Atlanta. What stories would you like to hear more about? We're always interested in hearing from you. Questions and comments, let us know, and always more on all of these stories on smarternews.com. Have a great week.